At a glittering Hollywood charity gala, a little girl stood alone, clutching a hand-drawn sign that read, "I want to meet a real superhero." Moments later, Keanu Reeves stopped mid-step. Chris Pratt followed, eyes locked on the same child. What happened next turned a quiet evening into a story America would never forget. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The ballroom shimmered beneath a canopy of golden light, every chandelier glowing like a suspended flame. It wasn't the usual Hollywood spectacle. This was a night meant to honor sacrifice. Across the vast marble floor stood men and women in crisp dress uniforms, families holding framed photos, and celebrities lending their names to a cause that cut deeper than fame. The banners read, "Hearts for Heroes, Honoring the Fallen." Keanu Reeves arrived quietly through a side entrance. No red carpet, no entourage, just a black suit, a loosened tie, and a calm humility that contrasted sharply with the flash of cameras. He greeted volunteers, shaking hands and thanking firefighters lined near the check-in table. He didn't need to say much. The sincerity in his eyes spoke for him. When an older captain clasped his shoulder and said, "It means a lot you're here," Keanu simply nodded. "It means a lot they were," he replied. Across the room, Chris Pratt's laughter rippled through the air. He was surrounded by veterans and first responders, teasing them in good humor, telling stories about his own brother who worked in law enforcement. "You guys are the real stars tonight," he said, raising a glass of iced tea instead of champagne. The men laughed, grateful for the warmth he brought into an otherwise heavy evening. The tables were decorated with red and gold ribbons, each centerpiece holding a small brass firefighter's helmet engraved with the name of someone who had given their life in the line of duty. The sound of soft jazz mixed with quiet conversations, punctuated by the occasional clinking of glasses. It was a night meant to celebrate courage. But beneath the music was the ache of memory, an invisible thread connecting every person in the room. Near the entrance stood a display wall. Dozens of framed photos lined its faces of men and women who had run toward flames when others ran away. Some were young, smiling proudly in their uniforms. Others looked older, the kind of heroes who had seen years of service and still answered the call one final time. Keanu paused before the wall, studying each picture carefully. He whispered something no one heard, a private thank you, before moving toward his table near the stage. The event's host, a retired fire chief, stepped up to the microphone and asked for everyone's attention. "Before we begin tonight's program, I'd like us to debut it, the Boston 9, to take a moment of silence," he said. The chatter faded instantly. The room fell still. Heads bowed, hands clasped. Even the music stopped. Keanu lowered his head. The reflection of the candlelight shimmered against his eyes. He thought of the fragility of life, of the people who wake every morning knowing their work could be their last. He thought of his own losses, the moments when silence was the only thing that made sense. Across the hall, Chris glanced over at him. For a brief moment, the two actors shared an unspoken understanding. This wasn't just another fundraiser. It was sacred ground. When the silence ended, the crowd broke into gentle applause. Soft, respectful, not celebratory, but grateful. Then came the faint sound of a child's voice. It was small, almost lost in the noise of clapping hands. But Keanu heard it. So did Chris. It came from near the back of the room, a fragile voice calling through the crowd. And in her hands, the little girl held a sign written, with uneven letters and glittered edges, "I want to meet a real superhero." And for a moment, the entire room, filled with movie stars, heroes, and grieving families, turned to see the girl with the sign. The little girl stood near the back wall, dwarfed by the tall adults around her. The sign she held trembled in her small hands, the glitter catching the light like stars. She wore a red dress that looked slightly too formal for her age, as if her mother had done her best to make the night feel special. Her shoes scuffed against the floor, and her eyes wide, uncertain, moved from face to face, searching for someone she recognized. Her mother, a woman in her early 30s with tired eyes and a proud posture, gently rested a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Emily, sweetheart, it's okay. Just hold it up. He'll see you." But her voice quivered, betraying the grief still raw beneath her calm. Keanu noticed first. He was seated near the edge of the stage, still half lost in thought, when that small, trembling sign caught his eye. He squinted, reading the words carefully. "I want to meet a real superhero." For a second, he thought it was part of the event, a prop or a contest entry. But then, he saw the little girl's expression. It wasn't excitement. It was something heavier, something that made his chest tighten. Chris followed his gaze. He leaned toward Keanu, whispering, "Do you see that?" Keanu nodded slowly, standing from his chair. Around them, people were starting to sit back down as the program resumed. But he didn't move toward the stage. He walked toward the crowd instead, weaving through tables and startled guests who turned their heads as he passed. The girl froze when she saw him coming. The noise in the room softened, replaced by murmurs. Cameras clicked somewhere in the distance, but Keanu's attention was fixed on her. He stopped a few steps away and knelt down to her, level. His voice was soft, steady. "Hey there. That's a beautiful sign. Who's your superhero?" The child hesitated, clutching the paper tighter. Her mother's lips trembled, his lips being, "My Rain." Then the girl whispered, "My dad." The room grew still again. Keanu's expression didn't change, but his eyes filled with understanding. "He sounds like a pretty amazing guy," he said quietly. "He was," the mother added, her voice breaking. "He was a firefighter. He saved 2 kids last year, but he didn't make it out." Keanu lowered his head slightly. "I'm so sorry." He looked at the sign again, then at Emily. "You know something? I think you already met a real superhero." Chris approached from behind, his usual easy humor gone. He knelt next to Keanu, looking the girl in the eye. "What your dad did, that's bravery most of us only dream about." Emily's small hands loosened around the sign. For the first time that evening, her eyes lifted, meeting theirs. A camera flash went off somewhere, but the moment was untouched. The air seemed to hold its breath. In a hall filled with famous faces, the quiet courage of one child and the compassion of 2 men turned an ordinary night into something unforgettable. Keanu stayed kneeling as the noise of the gala faded into a hum. He didn't look at the cameras or the onlookers, only at Emily's trembling hands. Slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the event's program card. Turning it over, he wrote something on the blank side with the pen clipped to his sleeve. Then he handed it to her with a small, quiet smile. On the card, in his looping handwriting, were 4 simple words: "Real heroes never fade." Emily stared at the note, her lips quivering as if she were trying to memorize each letter. Her mother pressed a hand to her mouth, tears slipping past her composure. Chris Pratt placed a hand on Keanu's shoulder. "You're right," he said softly. "She already met one." The crowd began to applaud again, but this time it wasn't polite or distant. It was heartfelt. Firefighters in uniform stood up. Families clapped through their tears. The band stopped playing, unsure if music could add anything to the moment. Keanu rose to his feet, gave Emily a gentle nod, and turned to her mother. "Your husband made sure people like me could stand here tonight," he said. "He's the real story." Laura could only nod, her voice lost in emotion. Emily looked up at him again and whispered, "Thank you." As Keanu walked back toward the stage, Chris followed beside him, both silent. The glittering lights of the ballroom felt dimmer, yet somehow warmer. The evening had shifted. What began as a charity gala was now something else entirely. By the time they reached their seats, everyone in the hall understood the truth. Sometimes, The smallest voice in the room carries the greatest power. The noise in the ballroom softened to a hush, as if the lights themselves leaned closer to listen. Emily stood clutching her glittery sign, unaware that the world around her had stopped moving. Her mother, Laura Brooks, gently adjusted her daughter's collar, whispering something only Emily could hear. But the girl's eyes were fixed on Keanu Reeves as he slowly walked toward her through the crowd. Keanu's pace was unhurried. Every step carried intention, not the polished grace of a celebrity, but the quiet respect of a man approaching sacred ground. People moved aside instinctively, lowering their cameras as if realizing this wasn't a moment to capture, but one to witness. Chris Pratt, who had been chatting with a group of first responders near the buffet, saw Keanu break from his table. He followed, curiosity etched on his face. Laura recognized Keanu immediately, but she couldn't form words. He was a symbol of strength to millions, yet in that instant, he looked as vulnerable as the child he was approaching. When he stopped in front of Emily, he lowered himself to one knee, keeping his eyes level with hers. The noise of the gala faded entirely, replaced by the soft hum of a string quartet in the distance. "Hey there," Keanu said gently. "That's a beautiful sign you made." Emily's fingers gripped the edges of the poster tighter. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was small but clear. Keanu smiled softly, a patient, fatherly smile. "Who's the superhero you're looking for?" he asked. Emily looked down, her curls falling over her face. For a moment, she didn't answer. Laura's eyes welled up as she knelt beside her daughter, resting a trembling hand on her back. "It's okay, honey. You can tell him." Emily looked back up at Keanu. "My dad was one," she said finally. "He saved people." Her voice cracked on the last word. The crowd grew still again. Chris stepped closer, standing just behind Keanu, his face tightening as he listened. Keanu's gaze softened. "Your dad sounds like a real hero." Emily nodded. "He was a firefighter. He went into a burning apartment last year. He got 2 kids out." She hesitated, glancing at her mother, but he didn't come back out. Laura's eyes closed, a tear rolling silently down her cheek. Keanu looked between them, struggling to find the right words. He didn't try to fill the silence. He let it breathe. Then he said quietly, "He must have been really brave." Emily's lip trembled. "I never got to say goodbye." Keanu felt something twist inside his chest. He wanted to tell her that her father could still hear her, that bravery like that never disappears, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he placed his hand over his heart and whispered, "Then maybe you just did." The room remained silent, the kind of silence that carried weight. Laura wiped her eyes and tried to smile, but the effort only deepened her grief. Emily clutched the edges of her sign, the glitter catching the ballroom, light like sparks fading from a dying fire. Keanu took a slow breath, then reached out his hand not to touch, but to offer presence. "Your dad did something very few people can do," he said gently. "He ran toward danger because someone needed him. That kind of courage doesn't disappear when a person's gone. It stays." Emily tilted her head, trying to understand. "Stays where?" she asked. Keanu smiled softly and pointed to her chest. "Right there." She placed her small hand over her heart, as if testing whether she could feel it. Her mother let out a quiet sob. The audience, unable to look away, stood frozen in empathy. Even the host of the gala, who had seen years of such tributes, had tears welling in his eyes. Chris Pratt stepped forward now, standing beside Keanu and lowering himself to one knee as well. His voice was warm, steady, and gentle. "You know, when I was a kid, I thought heroes were just people in capes. But your dad showed the world what a hero really looks like." Emily blinked, studying him for a moment. "Did you know him?" Chris shook his head. "No, but I know his kind. I've met a few people who risk their lives for others. They don't do it for fame. They do it because that's who they are. And that's something even time can't take away. Keanu glanced at Laura. What was his name? Laura swallowed hard. Captain Daniel Brooks. Keanu repeated it softly, like a prayer. Captain Daniel Brooks. Then he looked back at Emily. Your dad's name deserves to be remembered. Every time you tell his story, you keep him alive. Emily looked down at her glittery sign again. I just wanted people to know he was real. Everyone talks about superheroes on TV, but they don't talk about him anymore. Chris leaned closer. Then maybe we should start. The crowd broke into quiet applause, not loud or celebratory, but tender, like a collective heartbeat of gratitude. Firefighters in DT Zoll uniform bowed their heads. Some wiped tears away. Keanu stayed kneeling, his expression unreadable, but full of feeling. He whispered, "You did something tonight that no one else could do. You reminded everyone what real courage looks like." Emily's eyes shimmered, and for a fleeting moment, she smiled. Emily's smile faded almost as quickly as it came. She lowered her gaze, and her small fingers began to fold the corner of her sign. The glitter smeared against her thumb. People don't talk about him anymore, she said softly. It's like he disappeared. Laura knelt beside her, placing an arm around her daughter. Honey, people still remember your dad. They just don't know how to talk about it. Her voice cracked halfway through, and Keanu could tell she'd been carrying this pain alone for far too long. Keanu looked at them both, the mother and child wrapped in a silence that no applause could fill. Then he said gently, sometimes the people who deserve the most recognition don't ask for it. But that doesn't mean the world forgets. It just needs a reminder. Chris nodded beside him. And tonight, you reminded everyone, he said. You made them remember what real courage looks like. Emily's hand went to the small locket around her neck. She opened it and showed them a tiny photograph. Her father, Captain Daniel Brooks, in uniform, standing in front of a fire engine. His smile was bright, confident, and alive with purpose. Keanu leaned closer, studying the photo with quiet reverence. He's got that look, he said softly. The one that says he'd do it all again. Laura's eyes filled again, but this time with a gentler kind of sorrow. He would have, she whispered. He loved helping people. That night he ran in without hesitation. I watched the smoke rise from miles away, praying he'd walk out. But he never did. Chris looked down, shaking his head slowly. He saved 2 kids. That's not something the world should ever forget. Keanu's hand went to his jacket pocket again, almost instinctively. His fingers brushed the smooth metal of his keychain, the one engraved with the words, "Courage never dies." It had been a gift from an old stunt coordinator years ago, a reminder of resilience after a dangerous accident. To him, it wasn't about luck. It was about faith in something bigger than fear. He looked back at Emily. "Can I tell you a secret?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her eyes wide. "Every time I meet someone brave, I try to keep a small piece of that moment with me. It reminds me to do better, to be kinder, to stand up when it's hard. Your dad just gave me another one of those moments." Emily blinked slowly, as if trying to absorb what he'd said. "But how do I keep him with me?" she asked. Keanu smiled and touched his heart again. By living the way he did, by helping people, even in small ways. Every time you do that, you're saying goodbye a little less and keeping him alive a little more. The little girl's eyes welled up again, but this time, her tears carried something new, understanding. She looked at her mother, then at the men kneeling before her. "Then I'll do that," she said softly. "I'll be brave too." Chris placed his hand over his heart. "You already are," he said. A murmur of emotion spread through the crowd. Several firefighters stood up, one saluting quietly toward the girl. Keanu rose to his feet, but he didn't step away immediately. He looked back one last time and whispered, "Thank you for sharing your dad with us." Laura could barely respond. She only nodded, holding her daughter close. The host, sensing something profound unfolding, approached the microphone and said in a voice thick with emotion, "Ladies and gentlemen, this right here is why we're here tonight. To remember the courage that never dies." The crowd erupted in heartfelt applause, not for fame or spectacle, but for a family that had just turned grief into a legacy. As the lights glowed warmly above, Keanu and Chris exchanged a look of quiet resolve. Neither of them said a word, but they both knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something greater, something that would soon reach far beyond the walls of that ballroom. For a long, breathless moment, no one in the room dared to move. Keanu stood frozen, the weight of Emily's words pressing into him like a tide he wasn't prepared for. He'd heard stories of loss before, met families who'd suffered tragedy, but something about this small girl's trembling voice and the handmade sign in her hands pierced deeper than any film role or interview ever could. He looked down at her, unable to find the right words. His mouth opened, then closed again. A lifetime of practiced composure couldn't mask what was happening inside him, the emotion that cracked through his calm surface. The child's eyes were searching his face, as if waiting for an answer he didn't yet know how to give. Chris Pratt shifted beside him, equally struck. The humor that usually lit his face was gone. His hands tightened against his knees as he crouched lower, matching Keanu's level. Emily's mother, Laura, stood behind them, one hand gripping the strap of her purse like it was keeping her grounded. Her voice wavered as she whispered, "This is her first time out since the funeral." Keanu turned toward her slowly, his expression soft but heavy with empathy. "Since..." He didn't finish the sentence. Laura nodded, confirming the rest without words. He reached for the sign Emily was still holding, his hand trembling slightly as he touched the glittered paper. The room's golden light caught the edges of the words, "I want to meet a real superhero." He read it once, twice, then looked back at Emily. "You already did, kiddo," he said quietly. "He lives right here." He placed his palm gently over her small chest. Emily's breath hitched. Her lips quivered as tears began to fill her eyes, not from sadness alone, but from recognition someone had finally said what her heart had been trying to understand all along. The cameras around the room began flashing again, but Keanu didn't look toward them. He didn't care who was watching. This wasn't a performance. It was something real. Chris took a slow breath and found his voice. He smiled through the ache in his chest and said softly, "Your dad's story sounds like something out of a movie, but the best part is, it's real." His voice cracked slightly, betraying his emotion. "And because it's real, it matters even more." Laura covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed. A few guests began to weep openly. Firefighters in the audience exchanged knowing glances. The kind of courage that Emily's father had shown was something every one of them understood deep in their bones. Keanu kept his hand on her shoulder. "You know," he said, "sometimes heroes don't wear masks or capes. Sometimes they wear helmets and carry hoses." He smiled faintly. "And sometimes they leave behind someone as strong as you." Emily wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I miss him every day," she said. "I know," Keanu whispered, "and that means he did something right." Emily's words echoed faintly in the silence that followed. The ballroom, once filled with the clinking of glasses and the murmur of polite conversation, now felt suspended in time. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim. Keanu stayed kneeling, unsure whether to say more or let the stillness carry the weight that words could not. Laura stepped forward and knelt beside her daughter, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. Her voice was soft, barely audible. He used to tell her bedtime stories about bravery. Every night before bed, he'd say, "Courage means doing what's right, even when you're scared." She used to fall asleep, listening to his voice. After he died, she stopped asking for stories. Keanu's throat tightened. He sounds like the kind of man we need more of. Laura nodded through quiet tears. He was the kind who always ran toward the danger. He loved what he did, and he loved his family even more. Chris shifted his weight, slightly, lowering his tone as he spoke to Emily. I think your dad would be really proud of you. You know that? You being here tonight, holding that sign, it takes courage too. Emily sniffled, her voice trembling. I just wanted him to see me being brave. Keanu reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Then, I think he does, he said simply. His tone was steady, but his eyes were glistening. Sometimes bravery is quiet. Sometimes it's just showing up when it's hard. Emily looked up at him, her small eyes searching for truth. Do you ever get scared? The question caught him off guard. For a moment, he just looked at her, unsure how to answer. Then he nodded. All the time, he admitted softly. But when I do, I think about the people who faced things much harder than me and kept going. Like your dad. Like you. Chris smiled, his voice warm but shaking slightly. You see, bravery doesn't mean never being afraid. It means doing something anyway. And tonight, you reminded all of us what that looks like. A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. Even the host on stage stood silently, his microphone lowered. Every person in that room, actors, firefighters, widows, and fans, was caught in the same shared moment of understanding. Laura took her daughter's hand and pressed it to her heart. You hear that, sweetheart? Your dad's courage didn't end with him. It's right here. Emily nodded slowly, her lips trembling. Keanu placed his hand over hers, gently reinforcing the gesture. She's right, he whispered. Courage never dies. It just finds new hearts to live in. For a long moment, the three stayed like that, Laura, Emily, and Keanu, bound together by grief, courage, and something unspoken that passed between them. Chris watched in silence, his usual easy grin replaced by reverence. The sound of quiet sobs filled the room, and though no one said it aloud, everyone knew. They had just witnessed something far more meaningful than a speech or a performance. They had seen compassion raw, honest, and healing. Emily's small voice broke the stillness again. Do you think he knew he was going to die that night? She asked, her tone trembling between curiosity and pain. The question hit Keanu like a wave. Around them, several people turned their faces away, unwilling to cry in public. Keanu inhaled slowly, steadying himself. I think he knew there was a chance, he said gently. But he went anyway, because someone needed him. That's what real heroes do. They don't think about what they might lose, they think about who they can save. Laura covered her face, shaking quietly, as tears finally escaped. Chris reached for a napkin on the nearby table and handed it to her without a word. He looked at Emily with glistening eyes. Your dad didn't just save 2 kids that night, he said. He saved every person who'll remember him and try to live a little braver because of what he did. The girl's lower lip trembled. I still wish I could talk to him. Keanu's voice dropped to a whisper. You still can. He pointed gently to her heart again. You can tell him anything you want, anytime. He's listening. Something in those words broke the final barrier. Emily leaned forward and wrapped her arms around Keanu's neck. For a brief, fragile moment, the world outside that embrace ceased to exist. Keanu closed his eyes, holding her gently, his expression one of pure empathy. Applause rose slowly, hesitant at first, then stronger. It wasn't the applause of fans or audiences, it was gratitude, the kind that came from understanding, from connection. Chris wiped his eyes and smiled through it. Hey, he said softly to Emily, you just taught a room full of adults what real strength looks like. Keanu let out a quiet breath, still kneeling as he looked up toward Laura. Your husband's story shouldn't end with tragedy, he said. It should live on, in moments like this. Laura's tears shimmered under the lights. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing us. Keanu shook his head slowly. "No," he said, his voice steady. "Thank you for reminding us what courage really means." The host stepped back onto the stage, his voice thick with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "tonight we've been reminded why we do this, to honor those who gave everything." He looked toward Emily, then at Keanu and Chris, "and to remember that true heroes never fade." The applause returned, this time rising like a wave that filled every corner of the ballroom. Keanu stood, his expression solemn. Chris placed a hand on his shoulder as the two men exchanged a silent nod. The evening had changed them both. And as Emily held her sign a little higher, the words glittering under the golden light, everyone in that room understood one truth sometimes. When words fail, the heart speaks loud enough for the world to hear. The crowd's applause still lingered when the event host, a retired fire chief named Raymond Scott, stepped toward the microphone. His eyes glistened as he looked at Keanu, Chris, and the little girl holding her glittering sign. He cleared his throat, trying to speak past the lump that had formed there. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I think we've all just witnessed something truly special tonight, and I believe moments like this deserve to be shared." He turned toward Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, Mr. Pratt, would you both join us on stage?" The audience erupted into fresh applause. Keanu hesitated for a moment, still kneeling beside Emily. He gave her a small nod, silently asking permission. She looked at him with wide eyes and whispered, "Can I come too?" Keanu smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask." He stood and lifted her gently into his arms. She was small, light, and still clutching her handmade sign against her chest. The crowd parted as he carried her toward the stage. Chris followed beside them, his usually playful expression replaced by quiet reverence. When they reached the steps, the host extended a hand to help them up. Keanu shifted Emily slightly, making sure she was steady in his arms before stepping under the spotlight. The brightness hit their faces, but the mood in the room had changed completely. This wasn't about fame anymore. It was about something sacred, something pure. The host gestured toward Chris, offering him the microphone. Chris looked out at the crowd, his voice trembling slightly when he began. "This young lady," he said, motioning toward Emily, "came here tonight holding a sign that asked to meet a real superhero. But she didn't need to meet one. She already knew one." The audience grew silent. Every camera in the room focused on the small girl in Keanu's arms. Chris continued. "Her father, Captain Daniel Brooks, gave his life to save others. 2 children are alive today because of him. That's what a real superhero looks like." A wave of emotion swept through the ballroom. Dozens of firefighters stood up in respect, some saluting, others wiping tears. Laura, sitting near the front row, pressed her hands to her mouth as her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. Keanu turned to Emily, lowering his head so their foreheads almost touched. He whispered something no microphone could catch. Then, still holding her, he looked out over the audience and gave a single nod of acknowledgement, not to the cameras, but to the men and women in uniform who had risked everything just like her father. The applause that followed wasn't explosive. It was soft, heartfelt, the kind of sound that carried gratitude more than celebration. Keanu looked down at Emily and said quietly, "You're very brave to be here tonight." She whispered back, "I wanted him to be proud." "He is," Keanu said, "more than you'll ever know." The applause slowly faded into an emotional hush. The stage lights softened, glowing warmly across the crowd. Emily clung to Keanu's shoulder, shy but proud, as he gently set her down beside him. The microphone stood between them, gleaming under the gold light. Chris still held it, but for a moment, he didn't speak. He just looked out across the audience, hundreds of faces reflecting tears, reverence, and something deeper than admiration. He finally cleared his throat, his voice trembling with sincerity. "You know," he said, glancing at Keanu, When we make movies about heroes, we get to wear the costume, say the lines, and walk away at the end of the day. But the people we're honoring tonight, they don't walk away. They run toward the danger. And sometimes, they don't come back. The crowd murmured softly in agreement. Chris looked down at Emily, who stood small but unshaken beside Keanu. This little girl's father did exactly that, he continued. He didn't just save lives, he defined what the word courage really means. And tonight, I think it's our turn to make sure that kind of bravery isn't forgotten. The applause began again, slower this time, as if each clap carried a heartbeat. Keanu looked at Emily, his eyes thoughtful. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver keychain. It shimmered under the stage light, a simple motorcycle charm, slightly worn at the edges, with an engraving that caught the light just enough for the audience in front to glimpse the words, "Courage never dies." Keanu knelt beside her, clipping the keychain gently onto her wrist. "This belonged to someone who taught me to be brave," he said softly. "Now it's yours." Emily stared at the keychain, her little fingers tracing the engraved letters. "What does it mean?" she asked quietly. Keanu smiled faintly. "It means courage doesn't end when a person's gone. It lives on through others. Through every brave thing you do, every kind word you say, every time you choose to help instead of look away. That's how heroes stay alive." The crowd went silent again, drawn into the weight of those words. Laura, seated in the front row, couldn't hold back anymore. She rose to her feet, hands clasped, tears streaming freely. One by one, others followed: firefighters, their families, celebrities, strangers, all standing together in a quiet, reverent ovation. "I think we've all seen what real heroism looks like tonight," he said. "And it's standing right here on this stage." The hall erupted in emotion once more. Keanu stood, resting his hand lightly on Emily's shoulder as they turned to face the crowd. For a moment, the golden light reflected in her tearful eyes made her look radiant, like a spark of her father's spirit had found its way back to the world. The ovation continued until it became something more than applause. It was gratitude. People were no longer clapping for two movie stars. They were honoring the man who had given his life, the daughter who carried his light, and the quiet dignity that Keanu and Chris brought to the moment. Keanu took a slow breath and looked down at Emily. She was holding her wrist close to her heart, running her fingers over the keychain again and again. It dangled slightly, catching the light as though it held a heartbeat of its own. He whispered, "Do you know what your dad would say right now?" Emily looked up, her voice small. "What?" "He'd say you made him proud," Keanu answered, "and that he never left you. He's just right here, cheering you on." She smiled faintly, blinking away tears. "Do you really think so?" "I don't think so," Keanu said. "I know so." The audience was silent, except for the soft sound of people crying. Chris stepped forward again, the microphone steady in his hand. His voice was warm but firm. "Doesn't just happen on a battlefield or in a burning building. Sometimes it happens in small places, like a little girl showing up to a room full of strangers with a handmade sign and the biggest heart in the world." That drew a tender wave of laughter through the crowd. Even Emily smiled through her tears. Chris glanced toward Keanu and nodded. "What you did tonight reminded everyone what we forget sometimes. That heroes aren't found on screens, they're found in homes, in families, in the people who give everything for others." Keanu looked toward the rows of firefighters in uniform. He raised his hand slightly, a quiet salute of respect. "This keychain might say, 'Courage never dies,'" he said, "but I think it's bigger than that. It's about love. Love that doesn't stop when someone's gone. Love that shows up again and again through the people they've touched." Laura pressed a hand to her chest. "Overcome." The host stepped forward once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice trembling, "let's take a moment to remember every hero who gave everything. and to thank those who carry their legacy forward. The lights dimmed as a single spotlight stayed on Emily. She lifted the keychain toward the ceiling, her tiny hand shaking, but her expression was steady. The engraving caught the light again. Courage never dies. The audience stood as one, a silent sea of faces united in reverence. Keanu looked down at her and smiled softly. Emily nodded, whispering back, "I think he's here." In that moment, no one doubted her. The air felt charged with something unseen, yet undeniably real. The quiet presence of a hero, watching his daughter stand where he could not. As the lights faded to black, the story of Captain Daniel Brooks lived on, carried not just in memory, but in every heart that had witnessed that night's sacred silence. By sunrise, the story had already spread farther than anyone at the gala could have imagined. News outlets picked up the moment almost instantly, sharing the image of Keanu Reeves kneeling beside the little girl in the red dress. Within hours, it was everywhere on morning shows, magazine covers, and social media timelines across the world. The photograph of Keanu and Chris embracing Emily glowed with something words couldn't describe. The caption, written by a firefighter's widow who'd attended the event, read simply, "When hero meets hero." The phrase caught on like wildfire. Thousands of people shared the post, adding their own words of gratitude for first responders. Others wrote about their own fathers, mothers, or siblings who had served and sacrificed. For a rare moment, the internet didn't argue, didn't divide. It united in mourning and reverence for ordinary people who did extraordinary things. One news anchor described it as the most human moment Hollywood has seen in years. Another network aired the clip of Chris's speech and Keanu's gesture with the keychain, calling it a reminder that real compassion doesn't need cameras. But somewhere far from the noise of the headlines, in a quiet suburb just outside Los Angeles, Emily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, staring at the small silver keychain hanging from her wrist. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, catching the engraving just as it had, under the ballroom spotlight. Courage never dies. Her mother sat on the couch, holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold. "You've been looking at that for a while," Laura said gently. Emily nodded, not looking up. "It feels warm sometimes," she said. "Like it's alive." Laura smiled faintly. "Maybe it's because it reminds you of your dad." Emily looked up at her. "It reminds me of both of them," she said. "Dad and Keanu." The statement took Laura by surprise. There was no confusion in her daughter's tone, just sincerity. "He kind of reminds me of Dad, too," Emily continued softly. "He talks the same way, quiet but strong." Laura set her cup down, touched by the thought. "He does, doesn't he?" she said. The phone rang, cutting through the stillness. Laura reached for it absent-mindedly, expecting a relative, or perhaps a reporter hoping for an interview. She was ready to decline again, ready to protect what little privacy they had left. But when she heard the voice on the other end, her breath caught. "Hi, Laura. It's Keanu." She froze. "Oh my God! Mr. Reeves?" His voice was calm, the same quiet tone she remembered from the gala. "Please, call me Keanu. I just wanted to check in on you and Emily. I hope I'm not intruding." Laura blinked rapidly, the world around her blurring for a moment. "No, not at all. She's right here. We were just talking about you." Keanu chuckled softly. "Then I must have felt it. I wanted to see how she's doing after last night. I know that kind of evening can be overwhelming, especially for a child." Laura's voice trembled. She's been quiet, but I think it helped her." "You helped her." Keanu's voice softened even more over the line. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "She was very brave. I've been thinking about her since the gala ended. I meant what I said on that stage. I'd really like to come by sometime soon, if that's okay with you." Laura hesitated. taken aback by his sincerity. "You mean here? To our home?" "Yes," Keanu replied. "No cameras, no press, just me. I don't want this to be another headline. I just want her to know she wasn't forgotten." After the applause stopped, Laura couldn't find her words for a moment. The world had been loud ever since that night. The calls, the reporters, the constant requests for statements, but this man's quiet promise cut through it all like a warm beam of light. "She would love that," she said finally. "I think she needs that." "Then it's settled," Keanu said with a gentle laugh. "Tell her I'll come by soon. Maybe this weekend. I'll bring something small for her. Nothing fancy, just something that reminds her that courage isn't something you keep, it's something you share." Laura smiled through tears. "You're one of the kindest people I've ever met, Keanu." "I've just met some good people who taught me what kindness looks like," he replied. "Your husband sounds like one of them." When the call ended, Laura sat there for a long moment, the phone still pressed to her ear. She finally lowered it, blinking away tears she hadn't expected. Emily looked up from the floor. "Was that him?" Laura nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sweetheart. It was Keanu. He wants to come visit." Emily's eyes widened, her small hands tightening around the keychain. "He remembered?" "He remembered everything," Laura said. "And he meant what he said last night." The little girl smiled a real smile this time, not the polite kind she'd forced herself to give in public. "Can I show him Dad's helmet?" Laura's breath caught. She hadn't heard her daughter mention the helmet in months. It had sat untouched in a box since the funeral, sealed away because the sight of it hurt too much. You want to?" Emily nodded. "He said Dad was still with me. I want him to see what that looks like." Laura reached out and stroked her daughter's hair. "Then we'll get it ready together." Outside, the world was buzzing photos, interviews, headlines. But inside that quiet living room, everything slowed down. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, and the gleam of the silver keychain resting against a little girl's wrist became the rhythm of something sacred. Keanu Reeves might have been the one the cameras focused on, but for Emily, it was never about fame. It was about the way his kindness made her father's memory feel alive again. That evening, the golden light of sunset filtered through the curtains as Laura and Emily sat together on the floor beside the coffee table. Between them lay a small wooden box that had gathered dust for almost a year. Laura hesitated before opening it, her fingers brushing over the latch like it might break something sacred inside. "Are you sure you're ready?" she asked softly. Emily nodded. "He said courage doesn't die, right?" "I think Dad would want us to look." Laura opened the lid slowly. Inside was Captain Daniel Brooks's helmet, still marked with soot, its badge number faintly scratched from years of service. The smell of smoke and leather clung faintly to it, frozen in time. Emily touched the brim with gentle reverence. "He wore this the night he saved those kids," she whispered. Laura felt her throat tighten. "He never hesitated," she said, her voice trembling. "He always said there's no greater feeling than saving a life. He just never thought his own would be the one lost." Emily traced the engraved letters on the badge. "When Keanu comes, can we tell him everything about Dad?" Laura smiled faintly through her tears. "He'd love that, sweetheart, and I think your dad would too." The next morning, news programs continued to air the viral photo. Commentators spoke about heroism, empathy, and the rare humility of two actors who had turned a gala into a living tribute. Hashtags like #Courage Never Dies and #When Hero Meets Hero trended across every platform. People were donating to fire departments nationwide, inspired by the story of one little girl and her father's sacrifice. But in that quiet home, far from all the noise, Emily's world had already changed. She wore the keychain everywhere during breakfast, while doing homework, even as she slept. It wasn't just a gift from a famous actor. It had become something far greater, a promise. Later that day, Laura checked her voicemail. Keanu had left a message. His voice was calm, genuine. "Hey Laura, it's Keanu. Just wanted to say I'll stop by this Saturday around noon if that still works. I'll bring some flowers for Daniel if that's okay. Tell Emily I'm looking forward to seeing her again." Laura replayed it twice before saving it. For the first time in months, the heaviness in the house felt a little lighter. She turned to Emily, who was sitting by the window, drawing something. "Sweetheart," she said, "guess who's coming this weekend?" Emily looked up, her face lighting up instantly. "Keanu?" Laura nodded. "Keanu." Emily grinned, holding up her drawing. It was of her father, standing with Keanu and Chris on the gala stage. Above them, in big, uneven letters, she'd written, "Real heroes never fade." Laura felt tears in her eyes again. But this time, they weren't from sadness. They were from hope. Saturday arrived with a calm morning sky and the faint hum of summer air drifting through the neighborhood. The small suburban street where Laura and Emily lived was quiet, lined with maple trees and trimmed lawns. At the end of the block, the sound of a motorcycle grew closer, low and steady, like a heartbeat. Emily was sitting by the window, coloring in a drawing of her father when she heard it. She looked up instantly. "Mom," she whispered, "I think he's here." Laura set down the dish she was washing and looked outside. The sight caught her breath. Keanu Reeves, dressed simply in jeans, a dark jacket, and worn leather boots, pulling up on a black motorcycle that looked as old and dignified as its rider. He parked slowly, removed his helmet, and set it on the seat. In his hand, he carried a modest bouquet of white lilies, wrapped in brown paper. For a moment, he stood by the bike, taking in the quiet street. There were no cameras, no publicists, no entourage, just him. The simplicity of it made Laura's eyes water before he even reached the porch. Emily darted toward the door, her little feet padding across the hardwood floor. She swung it open before Laura could stop her. "You came?" she said, her voice filled with wonder. Keanu smiled warmly, his voice soft. "Of course I did. I promised, didn't I?" He stepped onto the porch, lowering himself slightly to her level just as he had that night at the gala. "Hi, Emily," he said. "You look even braver than I remember." She giggled shyly. "You brought flowers." He nodded, glancing at the bouquet. "For your dad. I thought lilies might be right. Strong, simple, and kind." Laura stepped forward, her voice shaking. "You didn't have to do that, Keanu." "I wanted to," he said. "I figured this visit wasn't about me, it's about him." He handed her the flowers, and for a brief moment, the three stood in silence on the porch, a triangle of quiet gratitude under the court. "Morning sun," Laura finally smiled. "Please, come in. I made some coffee." Keanu nodded and followed them inside. The house was modest but full of life, photos on the walls, drawings on the fridge, the smell of vanilla candles lingering in the air. He glanced around, noticing a framed photo of Captain Daniel Brooks in his uniform on a small table by the stairs. He paused there for a second, before taking a slow breath and following Laura into the kitchen. Emily climbed into her chair at the table, the silver keychain still clipped to her wrist. She held it up proudly. "See? I didn't take it off." Keanu smiled. "Good," he said softly. "It suits you." He took a seat at the table, setting his helmet down beside him. There was no formal tone, no awkwardness, just the calm warmth of shared humanity. For a few moments, no one spoke. The quiet hum of the refrigerator filled the space as Laura poured coffee into 3 mismatched mugs. She handed one to Keanu, who thanked her with a nod, and set another in front of her daughter, filled with warm milk instead. "I'm sorry if the house is a bit messy," Laura said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. We weren't expecting someone like you to visit our little kitchen. Keanu chuckled gently, shaking his head. You don't have to apologize. This is perfect. It feels real. Emily smiled, swinging her feet under the table. Do you always ride that big motorcycle? Keanu leaned back slightly. Most days, yes. It's old, but it's been with me for a long time. I like the quiet of the road. It gives me time to think. What do you think about? She asked curiously. He smiled softly. Mostly about people like your dad. People who don't make the news but change the world anyway. Laura's eyes glistened. He would have liked you, she said quietly. He wasn't much into movies, but he respected people who stayed humble. You're one of the few he would have called genuine. Keanu looked down, visibly touched. Thank you. That means more than you know. She stood, walking to a nearby cabinet, and returned, carrying a small photo album. Would you like to see some pictures of him? I'd be honored, Keanu said. She opened the album carefully. The pages yellowed at the edges. The photos showed Daniel in uniform, posing beside fire trucks, surrounded by his crew, and later with Emily on his shoulders at a 4th of July parade. There was one photo that made Keanu stop, a candid shot of Daniel laughing in his turnout gear, face streaked with soot, his arm around a fellow firefighter. Laura noticed his expression. That was taken the day before his last call, she said softly. He had just finished a 20-hour shift, and instead of going home, he stayed to train a rookie who was struggling. That was just who he was. Keanu's voice was low. He sounds like the kind of man the world doesn't forget. Laura closed the album carefully. Sometimes I worry it already has. Keanu reached across the table, his hand resting lightly on the album cover. Then, let's make sure it doesn't. Emily looked between them, her small voice breaking the quiet. Can I show him the helmet? Laura hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Go ahead, sweetheart. The girl slid off her chair and disappeared down the hallway, her footsteps echoing softly against the floor. Keanu sat back, his eyes following her, and whispered almost to himself, She's got his courage. Laura smiled faintly. She does. She just needed someone to remind her. Emily returned a moment later, holding the firefighter helmet carefully in both hands. The light caught the soot-stained surface, dull but proud. Its brass badge still marked with Daniel's number. She placed it gently on the kitchen table, as if it were something sacred. Keanu leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. May I? Emily nodded. Mom said you can. He touched the edge of the helmet with a kind of reverence reserved for something far greater than an object. His fingers brushed over the scratches and dents. Every mark on this tells a story, he said softly. You can almost feel it. Laura sat across from him, watching silently. That's the same helmet he wore the night he... Her words trailed off. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The air filled the space for her. Keanu looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the weight of her loss. Thank you for showing me this, he said quietly. I know that's not easy. It's not, she admitted. But I wanted you to understand who he really was. She stood and reached for a small wooden box on the counter. There's one more thing you should see. Inside the box was Daniel's badge, its silver surface dulled from years of heat and wear. Laura placed it beside the helmet. They gave it back to us after the funeral, she said. I couldn't look at it for months. Keanu stared at the badge for a long time before speaking. May I take a picture of it? He asked. Just one. I promise I won't post it anywhere. I want to remember him the right way. Laura hesitated, then nodded. Of course. He pulled out his phone, took a single photo, and looked at the image for a moment before putting the phone away. I'll make sure people remember him, he said quietly. Not as a tragedy, but as the reason we talk about courage at all. Tears filled Laura's eyes again. But this time, there was something different about them. Something healing. Thank you, she said. He would have wanted someone like you to tell his story. Keanu smiled faintly. Then maybe that's what I'll do. Emily climbed back into her chair, holding the keychain in one hand and looking at her father's badge with the other. Can you tell him something from me? She asked softly. Keanu tilted his head. Sure. What should I tell him? She took a deep breath. Tell him I'm not scared anymore. Keanu swallowed hard. I think he already knows, he said. He stood, picking up the bouquet of lilies he'd brought. He placed them gently beside the helmet. Thank you for letting me come, he said. You've given me more than I could ever give back. Laura walked him to the door, her voice quiet. You gave us something two-piece. Outside, Keanu slipped his helmet on, started the bike, and paused at the end of the driveway. He looked back toward the small house where bravery still lived, then rode away into the fading light. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, Keanu sat alone in his garage. His motorcycle was parked beside him, still carrying dust from the ride back from Laura's neighborhood. The flowers were gone, but the image of that small kitchen table and Emily's smile stayed in his mind. He thought about Daniel Brooks, the courage he represented, and the countless others like him whose families were left behind. For a long moment, Keanu just sat there, elbows on his knees, lost in the kind of silence that only arrives when something inside you begins to change. He reached for his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Chris Pratt's name. It rang twice before Chris answered, his voice still carrying a trace of humor. Hey man, I was just thinking about you. How'd the visit go? Keanu leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. It was heavier than I expected, he said quietly. But good. Emily's doing better. I just can't shake this feeling, Chris. There are so many families like hers, kids growing up without the heroes who raised them. Chris was silent for a moment, sensing where Keanu's thoughts were heading. You thinking about doing something? Yeah, Keanu replied. Something real. Something that lasts longer than a viral photo. He paused, his tone firm but contemplative. I want to help kids like Emily, children of first responders who gave everything. I've been turning this idea over in my head since the gala. Chris's tone shifted, the playfulness gone. That's exactly the kind of thing the world needs, man. We could do it together. Keanu hesitated. Together? Why not? Chris said, the energy rising in his voice. You've got the quiet heart. I've got the loud mouth and a social media following that actually listens. You fund it. I'll shout it from the rooftops. Keanu chuckled softly. We'd make a strange pair. Maybe, Chris replied, laughing, but it works. They spent the next hour on the phone, sketching ideas like two old friends planning a dream. By the time they hung up, the concept had a name, the Phoenix Project. It came from Keanu's suggestion. It means rising again, he explained. Rebirth from ashes. That's what these families do. They rebuild. Chris loved it immediately. The Phoenix Project, he repeated. It's perfect. Keanu promised to handle the foundation's first financial setup quietly, while Chris would create the public announcement. Neither of them wanted it to be about fame, it would be about honor. When Keanu finally hung up, the quiet of the garage returned. But it felt different this time. There was a sense of purpose in it. He looked up at an old photo pinned on the wall him on set years ago, smiling between takes. For the first time in a long time, he felt that his next role wasn't meant for a screen. The next morning, Chris followed through on his word. By dawn, he was sitting at his kitchen counter with a cup of coffee and his laptop open. His wife, Catherine, leaned over his shoulder, curious. You're up early. Another script? He shook his head. No, something better. He started typing a post for his social media, reading each word out loud as he wrote it. A week ago, I met a little girl who lost her firefighter dad saving 2 kids. Her courage and her mom's changed something in me. So Keanu Reeves and I are launching the Phoenix Project to help children of fallen heroes rebuild their dreams. Catherine smiled softly. That's beautiful, Chris. It sounds like something Daniel Brooks would have been proud of. Chris nodded, remembering the man's story. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's the whole point." He attached a simple image, a black background with the words, "The Phoenix Project" in white, and underneath it, the phrase, "Courage never dies." He hit post. Within minutes, it exploded. Thousands of likes turned into tens of thousands. Comments flooded in from firefighters, police officers, EMTs, and military families. People shared stories of parents, siblings, and spouses they'd lost in the line of duty. It wasn't just a trend, it was a movement. While the world was talking, Keanu was working behind the scenes. He met privately with a small team of legal advisors and charity organizers. No press, no fanfare. He wrote the first donation check himself, a substantial sum that would fund the first scholarships and family grants. "Keep my name off the paperwork," he said quietly to the accountant. "This isn't about me." By evening, Chris called him again, his voice bursting with excitement. "Keanu, it's everywhere." CNN picked it up. NBC's running a feature. People are already donating. Keanu smiled faintly. "That was fast." "You did this, man," Chris said. "You sparked it. You gave people something good to rally behind." Keanu looked out his window at the fading light. "No," he said. "Emily did. Her dad did. We're just passing the torch." That night, as the news replayed clips of their speech at the gala, a new headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Actors Keanu Reeves and Chris Pratt launch foundation to support families of fallen heroes. The coverage was overwhelming, but Keanu kept his phone silent. He wasn't looking for recognition. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table with a notebook and began sketching out the foundation's first event. Something humble, something real. No red carpets, no champagne. He wrote the words, "Community Barbecue, Station 19, honoring Captain Daniel Brooks." He underlined them twice. Then, setting down his pen, he whispered quietly into the stillness, "Let's make it count." Outside, the city lights blinked softly against the dark horizon, as if the universe itself was nodding in quiet approval. 2 weeks later, the smell of barbecue. Smoke drifted through the warm afternoon air of Los Angeles County Fire Station 19. Folding tables were set up across the back lot, covered with red and white checkered cloths. Firefighters in uniform mingled with families, neighbors, and children, laughing between games of tag. It wasn't a gala or a formal event. There were no reporters with microphones, no flashing cameras. It was simple, honest, exactly the way Keanu wanted it. He arrived quietly, wearing jeans and a plain black shirt, helping the volunteers unload coolers from the truck. When one of the firefighters realized who he was, Keanu just smiled and said, "No autographs today, just hands-on work." Chris showed up minutes later, carrying a box of homemade cookies from his wife. "This is my kind of fundraiser," he joked, setting them down next to the grill. The banner hanging between two ladders read, "The Phoenix Project, honoring Captain Daniel Brooks and all fallen heroes." Beneath it stood a framed photo of Daniel, his smile bright and proud, next to his old helmet and badge. Emily and Laura stood near it, helping arrange flowers that visitors brought to the table. When Keanu approached, Emily's face lit up. "You came," she said, running to hug him. "I said I would," he replied with a grin. "And I never break a promise," she giggled. "Mom says this whole thing started because of you." He shook his head. "It started because of your dad, and because of you." Chris called everyone together for a short announcement. He stood on a small platform made from wooden crates, holding a microphone that squeaked once before settling. "We didn't want to make today fancy," he began, "because heroism isn't fancy. It's everyday people doing impossible things for others. That's what Captain Brooks did, and that's what the Phoenix Project stands for." The crowd applauded softly. Firefighters nodded in agreement, some with arms folded, others holding back emotion. Keanu stepped up beside him. "We're here to honor courage," he said. "Not just the kind that runs into fires, but the kind that faces what comes after the families, the children, The quiet strength it takes to keep living when someone's gone. His voice was steady, but his eyes glistened. He turned toward Emily and Laura. "You showed me that courage doesn't end with loss. It grows." Emily smiled proudly, her small hand resting on her father's framed photo. Chris raised his hand. "We're happy to announce that the Phoenix Project has already received over $500,000 in donations, and our first scholarships are being named after Captain Daniel Brooks." The applause this time was louder, joyful. People clapped, cheered, and embraced one another. Laura covered her mouth in shock, tears spilling down her cheeks. Keanu knelt beside Emily again and whispered, "Your dad's story just helped a lot of other kids." Emily looked up, her smile pure and free of sorrow for the first time since the tragedy. "Then he's still saving people," she said softly. Keanu nodded. "Exactly." As the sun began to set behind the fire trucks, laughter and music filled the air. The smell of grilled food, mixed with the warmth of something invisible, yet powerful, the rebirth of hope. And for the first time, Emily's smile wasn't shadowed by grief. It was full of life. As the smell of barbecue still hung in the evening air, the laughter of children echoed through the open lot behind Station 19. Firefighters leaned against their trucks, plates in hand, talking quietly about the old days. The event had gone better than anyone expected. For a few precious hours, grief had been replaced by something lighter belonging. Keanu stood near the memorial table, his hands resting in his pockets as he watched Emily dart around with a handful of crayons and folded paper. She had been busy all afternoon, sitting at a picnic bench under the shade of a large oak tree, drawing intently while the adults spoke. Laura had smiled when Keanu asked what she was making. "She said it's a surprise," she whispered. Chris was helping stack chairs nearby, his face red from the sun, but bright with energy. "You sure you don't want to take a break?" Keanu called out with a grin. Chris laughed. "Man, this is my break. I haven't done anything this normal in years. It feels good." Moments later, Emily came running toward them, clutching something behind her back. Her face glowed with excitement. "Can I show you something?" she asked, breathless. Keanu crouched down, smiling. "Of course you can. What have you got there?" She held out a sheet of paper covered in colorful pencil marks. At first glance, it looked like a child's simple drawing, but then Keanu saw it clearly. There were 3 figures standing side by side. One was her father, drawn in his firefighter uniform with angelic wings faintly outlined behind. The other 2 were unmistakable. Keanu and Chris, both wearing red capes. Above them, written in bright block letters, were the words, "Heroes come in many forms." For a moment, Keanu couldn't speak. His throat tightened. Chris stepped closer, peering over his shoulder, and let out a low whistle. "Wow, that's incredible, kiddo." Emily looked between them, nervous now. "Do you like it?" Keanu exhaled slowly, trying to steady himself. "Like it?" he said softly. "Emily, this is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen." He turned the drawing around, showing it to the nearby firefighters, who smiled and nodded approvingly. "Look at this," he said. "That's Daniel right there, still looking out for everyone." Laura approached, wiping her hands on a napkin, her voice thick with emotion. "She's been working on that since last week. She wanted to give it to you today." Keanu reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small clear frame he had bought earlier for photos of the event, and slid the drawing inside carefully. "Then it's getting framed right now," he said, smiling through glassy eyes. "I'll hang it in my house where I can see it every day." Chris grinned. "Hey, wait a second. If you're keeping that one, I need a copy. I want it in my office, right next to my Star-Lord poster." Emily giggled. "Okay, I'll make you one with extra glitter." Keanu smiled at Emily's answer, touched by how easily she'd shifted the mood with her innocent promise. "Deal." he said. "But only if you sign it this time. Every artist should sign their masterpiece." Emily nodded proudly and scribbled her name in the corner of the drawing before handing it back to him. The letters were uneven and crooked, but Keanu studied them like they were gold. "Perfect," he said quietly. "Absolutely perfect." Chris chuckled, slapping Keanu on the shoulder. "Man, you're going to make me cry again. Don't you dare start first." Keanu laughed softly but didn't take his eyes off the picture. "You can feel her dad in it," he said. "It's like he's right there with us." Laura stood beside them now, her voice warm. "I think that's what she wanted. She kept saying all week, 'Daddy's brave, but they're brave too.'" The firefighters nearby overheard and nodded in quiet agreement. One of them, an older man with gray streaks in his hair, spoke up. "Your little girl's got it right. We do what we can, but we need reminders like this to keep going." Keanu turned to him, shaking his hand firmly. "Then we'll make sure the Phoenix Project keeps those reminders alive," he said. "This isn't the end, it's the start." Before long, word spread through the crowd about Emily's drawing. A few local reporters who had been invited to cover the event approached, cameras in hand. One of them called out, "Mr. Reeves, Mr. Pratt, can we get a quick statement about what this foundation means to you?" Keanu looked toward the memorial banner, the photo of Daniel Brooks framed beneath it, and then back to the reporter. He shook his head gently. "This isn't about us," he said. "It's about them. About the people who risk everything, and the families who have to be brave after." The reporters fell silent. His tone wasn't defensive, it was sincere, grounded, final. He placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "You can write about that," he said softly. "About how courage doesn't disappear when someone's gone. It just moves to the next heart." Chris stepped up beside him, nodding. "What?" he said. "Tonight's about heroes, the kind who never stop teaching us what strength looks like." That moment, captured by one quiet cameraman, became another image the world wouldn't forget. Keanu's words spread quickly online. Within hours, the Foundation's social media account changed its banner to a single quote from "They didn't die, they live on, through courage." It became the Phoenix Project's official motto. Later that evening, as the event wound down and the last rays of sunset painted the sky orange, Keanu found Emily sitting on the hood of a fire truck, swinging her legs. She was tired, but glowing with pride. He sat beside her, looking up at the darkening sky. "You did something special today," he told her. Emily looked up at him. "So did you." Keanu smiled, shaking his head. "No, kiddo. You reminded us that real heroes never fade. They just keep shining through people like you." And for the first time that night, both of them sat in silence, smiling, as the world around them slowly turned to dusk. Winter came and went, and by the time the leaves began to turn green again, the Phoenix Project had grown from a small idea into a national movement. Donations poured in from across the country. Fire departments, schools, and even local restaurants hosted small fundraisers to contribute. What started as one emotional night in a ballroom had become a mission that touched lives everywhere. On a bright spring afternoon, the foundation hosted its first official scholarship ceremony in a small auditorium in downtown Chicago. The walls were lined with banners featuring the motto that had become their symbol: "They live on, through courage." At the center of the stage, a large photograph of Captain Daniel Brooks hung above the podium. His firefighter's helmet rested below the picture, surrounded by flowers and candles. It wasn't just decoration, it was a reminder of how it all began. Keanu sat quietly in the second row, dressed simply in a gray suit, hands folded in his lap. He didn't want to be the focus of the day. His seat was tucked between Emily and Laura, both dressed modestly and glowing with quiet pride. Chris stood near the stage, greeting guests, shaking hands with families who had traveled from out of state to attend. The audience included dozens of children who had lost parents in service, some firefighters, others police officers or paramedics. Their faces were young, but carried a strength that adults could learn from. The host, stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "today we gather to celebrate the first recipient of the Phoenix Project Scholarship, an opportunity created in honor of Captain Daniel Brooks and every hero who gave their life so others could live." Applause filled the room, soft but heartfelt. In the front row, a young girl named Mia Thompson sat nervously clutching her mother's hand. She was 16, shy and humble. Her father, a firefighter from Chicago's South Side, had died 2 years earlier, rescuing a family from an apartment fire. She had been chosen as the first scholarship recipient because, like Emily, she had turned her grief into purpose, volunteering at local fire stations and tutoring children of first responders. Keanu leaned toward Emily and whispered, "She reminds me of you." Emily smiled. "She's braver than me." When Mia's name was called, she walked to the stage slowly, her steps steady but emotional. Laura squeezed Emily's hand and nodded. It was her moment now. Emily took the envelope from the host and walked to the podium with the same grace she'd seen in Keanu months earlier. She handed the award to Mia with both hands, whispering, "My dad was a firefighter too." Mia's eyes filled instantly. "Then we're kind of like sisters," she said softly. Emily nodded, smiling through tears. The audience erupted into applause again. Keanu felt his chest tighten with emotion. For the first time since Daniel Brooks's passing, the pain of loss had fully transformed into something bright, something alive. As the applause faded, Chris walked up to the microphone, his usual confidence tempered by sincerity. He looked out at the audience, at the families and children who had lived through the same kind of pain that Emily once carried. "You know," he began, "people call us actors heroes sometimes, but I think everyone in this room knows the truth. Real heroes don't need cameras or scripts. They just do what needs to be done. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things, that's what today is about." The audience nodded and clapped softly. Chris looked toward Keanu and smiled. "I can't take credit for this idea," he said. "It came from someone who believes that courage doesn't end when a hero falls. It continues through their families, their communities, and their children. That's what the Phoenix Project is here to protect." Keanu felt the attention shift toward him, but he stayed seated, giving a small nod of appreciation before looking back at Daniel's photo on the stage. When the host invited him to speak, he hesitated for a moment, then stood. He didn't take the podium. Instead, he walked to the side of the stage and faced the audience directly. His voice was calm, steady, and heartfelt. "When Chris and I started this, we didn't want it to be about us," he said. "We wanted to honor the people who don't get credit, the men and women who show up every day knowing they might not come home." He turned slightly, gesturing toward the large photo of Daniel. "This all began because of one little girl and her father, a man who ran into fire and never came back out. His courage inspired a child to be strong, and that child reminded the rest of us that bravery doesn't die, it just changes form." The room was completely silent now, every word landing like a heartbeat. Keanu glanced at Emily, who smiled softly from her seat. "Captain Daniel Brooks didn't just save 2 lives that night," Keanu continued. "He saved many more through what his story has built. This foundation, this scholarship, it's proof that heroism never fades. It passes from one generation to the next." He paused, emotion flickering in his voice. "So today, when we honor Mia Thompson, we also honor every firefighter, police officer, medic, and soldier who's ever put others first. We're here because they taught us what love looks like in action." The audience rose to their feet in applause. Mia stood frozen on stage, tears streaming down her face. She turned toward Daniel's picture and whispered, "Thank you," before stepping off to hug her mother. Reporters in the back scribbled notes furiously. But when one called out, "Mr. Reeves, how does it feel to be leading such a powerful movement?" Keanu shook his head. "I'm not leading anything," he said simply. I'm just following the example of people like Captain Brooks and kids like Emily and Mia." That single line became the headline the next morning. And when the cameras replayed the event later that night, they didn't focus on Keanu's face. They focused on Daniel's photo shining behind him, framed in golden light. The following month, after the success of the first Phoenix Project scholarship, Keanu began receiving requests from journalists, producers, and filmmakers across the country. Most wanted interviews, sound bites, or photo shoots. But one message stood out. It came from a quiet, independent filmmaker named Sarah Donnelly, whose father had been a paramedic for 30 years. Her email wasn't about fame or promotion, it was about truth. "Mr. Reeves," she wrote, "I believe the world needs to hear these families' voices. Not as statistics, but as stories of love and courage that never die. I'd like to make a short documentary. Nothing commercial, just real stories told by the people who live them. We could call it Courage Never Dies." Keanu read it twice, then sat back, the title echoing in his mind. It wasn't just a phrase anymore. It had become a symbol. Still, he hesitated. He had always shied away from projects that centered on him. He didn't want the message to get lost in the glare of celebrity. But Sarah's sincerity felt different. He called Chris that evening. "There's a filmmaker who wants to make a documentary about the Phoenix Project," he said. "She wants it to focus on the families, the kids, the people behind the badges." Chris sounded intrigued. "I like it already, but are you sure you want to do that? You know what happens when cameras get involved." "I do," Keanu said. "That's why I want to make sure it's done right. No lights, no glamour, just truth." After a short pause, Chris said, "Then count me in. If it helps people see what real courage looks like, I'll do whatever it takes." A week later, Keanu and Chris met Sarah in a small studio in Courage, downtown Los Angeles. She was young, humble, and passionate. "I'm not here to make you look heroic," she told them. "You already did your part by giving these families a voice. I want the world to see them as I see them. Ordinary people who remind us what bravery means." Keanu nodded. "Then we're on the same page." They began production that same month. Instead of polished sets, they filmed in firehouses, community halls, and family kitchens. Keanu and Chris served as narrators, their voices guiding viewers through each story. They interviewed widows who spoke softly about the husbands they'd lost. They met teenage sons who had grown up too fast, mothers who had learned to be both parents, and children who still slept with their father's jackets beside them. There were no scripted lines, just conversations filled with pauses, tears, and quiet laughter. The rawness of it all became the heart of the film. When filming moved to Los Angeles, Sarah suggested interviewing Emily and Laura. Keanu hesitated. "She's already done so much," he said. But Laura agreed without hesitation. "If her story can help others heal, Daniel would want that," she said. Filming the segment with Emily took place on a quiet Sunday afternoon at Station 19, where the Phoenix Project had first begun. The same fire truck stood gleaming in the sunlight, and the same banner, "Courage Never Dies," hung proudly between the ladders. Emily arrived in her red dress, the same one she'd worn at the gala, though she had grown taller and more confident since then. The silver keychain still hung from her wrist, its engraving now faintly worn from use. Sarah set up a single camera. No lights, no crew noise, just the open space, the hum of the city outside, and the little girl who had changed so many lives. She sat on an old firehouse bench with Keanu beside her and Chris standing quietly in the background. Sarah began gently. "Emily, can you tell us what this keychain means to you?" Emily looked down at it for a moment, then up at the camera. "It reminds me that my dad didn't really leave," she said softly. "He's still helping people. Every time someone gets a scholarship, or when kids smile because of the Phoenix Project, I think he's there too." Keanu listened, his eyes glistening, his voice steady, but low. "You've taught a lot of people what real courage looks like, Emily." She turned to him, her tone curious but warm. "You think so?" "I know so," Keanu replied. "Because courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being scared and still choosing to do what's right. You've done that every single day." The camera caught her small smile, the kind that carried both innocence and wisdom beyond her years. Then she lifted the keychain and showed it to the lens. "It says courage never dies," she said. "That's what my dad taught me, and that's what Keanu and Chris teach me too." When Sarah ended the recording, no one spoke for several seconds. Even the firefighters watching from the distance wiped at their eyes. Weeks later, when the short documentary premiered online, it took only 24 hours for it to sweep across the country. Clips of Emily's segment were shared on social media with captions like, "This is what real heroism looks like." Firehouses in cities from Boston to Seattle screened the documentary in their common rooms. Schools showed it during assemblies about service and character. Major networks covered the story again, this time not as celebrity news, but as a national message of gratitude. One headline read, "Courage Never Dies: How a Firefighter's Daughter and Two Actors Reignited America's Respect for Heroes." Keanu watched the premiere privately from his home, sitting alone in the soft glow of his living room. When Emily's face appeared on screen, holding that silver keychain and saying her father was still helping people, his clean throat tightened. He didn't see himself in the film. He saw Daniel Brooks. He saw the families. He saw courage reborn. The documentary ended with Emily's voice saying, "Heroes don't really go away. They just teach us how to keep being brave." Keanu sat in the silence that followed and whispered the words back to himself, smiling through tears. "That's right, kiddo. Courage never dies." A few weeks after the Courage Never Dies documentary went viral, Keanu's home office became filled with stacks of envelopes. Letters from across the country arrived daily. Firefighters, teachers, students, widows, and children who had seen Emily's story and felt something stir inside them. Most thanked him. Some shared their own losses, and a few sent photos of loved ones who had served. Keanu read every one. But one letter stopped him cold. It came in a plain white envelope with handwriting that looked hesitant, uneven, as though written by someone unused to putting feelings on paper. The return address was from New York City. Keanu opened it slowly, unfolded the page, and began to read. "Dear Mr. Reeves," it began. "My name is Jacob Morales. I'm 17. My dad was a firefighter in Brooklyn. He died on the 11th of September 2001. I was 3 years old, so I don't really remember him, but I've spent my whole life trying to understand what kind of man he was." Keanu stopped there for a moment, his throat tightening. He continued, "When I watched your documentary, I saw something I'd never seen before. I saw what courage looks like when people talk about it, not like it's a movie, but like it's real. When Emily said her dad didn't really leave, that he's still helping people, that hit me. I'd never thought of my dad that way before. You reminded me that heroes aren't forgotten. They just live differently now." The letter ended with one final line that broke something open in Keanu's chest. "I wanted to thank you and your friend for helping me remember that my dad didn't just die. He lived." Keanu set the paper down and leaned back in his chair. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. His eyes burned as he stared at the letter, reading the last line over again until it blurred. That night, he called Chris. When Chris answered, his voice was half asleep but cheerful. "Hey man, what's up? You sound serious." Keanu took a deep breath. "I got a letter today from a boy whose dad died in 9/11. He said the documentary made him feel like his father was still alive somehow." There was a long pause. Chris finally said softly, "Wow, that's something, man." Keanu's voice cracked a little. He's 17. He's been living with that loss almost his whole life, and it took a film about another firefighter to help him see his father again. We have to do more. Chris listened quietly on the other end of the line. His usual, easygoing voice, replaced by something deeper. "You're right," he said finally. "We can't stop now." The Phoenix Project helped with scholarships. But these kids, they need more than money. They need healing. Keanu nodded, even though Chris couldn't see him. Exactly. They need someone to talk to. A safe place to grieve, to remember, to feel like they still matter. What if we fund therapy programs specifically for kids who've lost parents in the line of duty? Chris was silent for a moment, thinking, that might be the most important thing we could ever do. "I don't want it to be public," Keanu said firmly. "No press releases, no photo ops. We'll do it quietly. Just help the families who need it." Chris smiled through the phone. "You've got it, man. I'll handle the logistics. You handle the heart." Within weeks, the idea became a reality. Using the growing resources of the Phoenix Project, they partnered with small mental health clinics and grief counselors across the country. They didn't call it a new campaign or brand it as a celebrity initiative. Instead, the money quietly appeared in hospital budgets and community centers under a single line: Children of the Fallen Support Fund. It began in New York, with a therapy program created in Jacob Morales' name, the boy who had written the letter. When Keanu called Jacob's mother to tell her about it, she was overwhelmed. "He'll be so proud," she said through tears. "He struggled for so long to talk about his father. Now he'll know his pain is helping others heal." Keanu didn't tell her that he'd framed Jacob's letter and hung it in his study beside Emily's drawing. 2 simple pieces of paper, one from a child, one from a teenager, had changed everything he thought he knew about heroism. Months passed, and the initiative grew quietly. Letters from grateful parents and counselors trickled in. They spoke of children who had started smiling again, of families finding peace, of hope returning in places where silence once lived. Chris called one evening to read a note from a clinic in Boston. "Listen to this," he said. "2 siblings came in today. Both had lost their firefighter dad. They said they saw the Courage Never Dies documentary, and it gave them courage to ask for help. They said, 'If Emily can talk about her dad, so can we.'" Keanu listened, emotion caught in his chest. "That's it," he whispered. "That's what this was all for." He didn't attend many public events anymore. When reporters asked him about the Phoenix Project, he always redirected the spotlight back to the families. "The real heroes aren't on camera," he'd say. "They're the ones who keep going when the world stops." He and Chris kept funding the therapy programs quietly, visiting firehouses when no one was watching, sitting with grieving parents in silence, offering hugs instead of speeches. The work wasn't glamorous. It didn't make headlines, but it mattered. Late one night, Keanu sat in his study, the letter and the drawing beside each other on the wall. A single lamp cast a soft glow over both. He leaned back in his chair, the house silent around him. He thought about Daniel Brooks, about Jacob's father, about every firefighter whose name he'd learned since the project began. And in that quiet, something settled deep inside him, a truth too profound for words. Courage, he realized, wasn't about grand gestures. It was about persistence, about showing up, even in the shadows, when no one is watching. And as long as he lived, he promised himself he would keep doing just that. The months that followed were a time of quiet rebuilding for Laura Brooks. For so long, her life had been defined by loss the day Daniel didn't come home. The sound of folded uniforms, the silence of a child who no longer knew how to laugh. But the Phoenix Project changed that. What began as a story about her husband's sacrifice had grown into a lifeline for others like her. And somehow, in helping them, she had started to heal herself. Every morning, Laura drove to the small Los Angeles office that served as the foundation's headquarters. It wasn't a glamorous space, just a few desks, framed photos of fallen heroes, and a whiteboard filled with upcoming events. But when she stepped inside, she felt purpose again. She coordinated calls from widows and parents across the country, helping match them with support groups and therapists funded by the new Children of the Fallen program. Sometimes, she would spend hours on the phone with someone she'd never met, listening to them cry, guiding them through what she once faced alone. Her empathy didn't come from training or textbooks, it came from experience. When she told them, "I know what you're going through," they believed her, because she truly did. Chris visited the office one afternoon between shoots. He walked in holding 2 cups of coffee, grinning. "I figured the boss could use some caffeine." Laura laughed, taking one. "If I'm the boss, we're in trouble." "You're the glue," Chris said seriously. "Keanu and I started this, but you're the one keeping it real." She smiled, touched by his sincerity. "I just try to make sure no one feels forgotten." He nodded slowly. "You know, Daniel would be proud." Her smile faltered for a second, and then softened. "I think he'd just be happy we're helping people the way he did." That afternoon, as the sunlight streamed through the blinds, Laura sat at her desk reading through emails from families helped by the program. One was from a widow in Texas who had lost her husband in a wildfire. "Thank you," it read. "You gave my son someone to talk to when I couldn't." Laura wiped away tears as she read it, then closed her eyes. The ache was still there, but it no longer hollowed her out. It had turned into something steadier, something she could carry. Just then, the office door opened quietly. Keanu stepped in, dressed casually, carrying a small potted plant. "I thought your desk could use something green," he said with a gentle smile. Laura chuckled. "You're turning this into a garden." He shrugged. "A little life in the room can't hurt." They sat together at the small conference table, the same one, where the foundation's earliest plans were drawn. Neither spoke for a while. There was no need to. Some silences, they had learned, didn't need to be filled. They needed to be shared. After a few quiet minutes, Laura looked up from her coffee. "You know," she said softly, "when Daniel died, I used to think the world would always feel gray. I didn't believe in the idea of moving on. I just thought surviving was enough." Keanu listened carefully, nodding for her to continue. "But when you came to our house," she went on, "you didn't just talk about loss. You talked about courage, about keeping his spirit alive through kindness. At first, I didn't understand. But now, every time I see another family get help, every time I hear laughter at one of our support sessions, I realize that's what you meant." Her voice trembled slightly. "You didn't just honor my husband, Keanu. You gave us back hope." Keanu's expression softened. He leaned forward, his knot elbows resting on the table. "Laura," he said quietly, "Daniel gave us the example. We just followed it. All we did was keep the fire going that he started." Laura smiled faintly, tears glistening in her eyes. "You make it sound simple." "It is," Keanu replied. "Not easy, but simple. You take one brave act and you pass it on. That's what courage does." At that moment, Emily appeared in the doorway, holding a drawing she had made that morning. She was growing fast, her face older, her smile more confident, but her eyes still held that spark of pure light. "Mom, Mr. Reeves," she said, "I finished another one." Keanu turned to her with a grin. "Let's see it." She held up the picture. It showed her father again, standing beside Keanu and Chris, but this time there were others behind them. Firefighters, nurses, teachers, and children, all linked hand in hand. At the top, in her careful handwriting, it read, "The Phoenix never falls." Laura covered her mouth, overcome by emotion. "Emily, that's beautiful." Emily shrugged shyly. "I wanted to draw everyone who helps now. Daddy started it, but it keeps going. Like the keychain says." She raised her wrist proudly, showing the worn silver charm. Keanu's eyes glistened. "You have no idea how many lives you've changed, Emily," he said softly. She smiled and stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him. He froze for a second, then returned the hug gently, his hand resting on her shoulder. Laura watched, tears sliding down her cheeks, as the man who had once been a stranger now stood as part of their family. Chris entered the office then, noticing the moment but saying nothing. He simply smiled and leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. For a few seconds, time seemed to slow. The afternoon light poured through the blinds, bathing the room in a soft gold glow. It was more than just a hug. It was the closing of a circle that had begun with tragedy and found its way back to grace. Laura exhaled, her heart finally at peace. For the first time since Daniel's passing, the ache in her chest no longer felt like loss. It felt like love that had learned to keep living. 1 year later, the California sun rose over the Warner Studios backlot, washing the quiet morning streets of the film set in gold. Crew members carried cables, makeup artists laughed near their trailers, and the smell of coffee mingled with the faint sound of hammering from a nearby stage. At the center of it all stood Keanu Reeves and Chris Pratt, side by side again, dressed in dusty firefighter gear for their new movie about courage and brotherhood. Between takes, Keanu stood near the catering tent, quietly reviewing his script pages. Chris walked up, handing him a bottle of water. "You'd think after all this time you'd have the lines memorized," he teased. Keanu smiled faintly. "I like to keep them fresh." He glanced toward the edge of the lot, where a familiar face was approaching, sunlight bouncing off the badge on her shirt. His expression softened instantly. Speaking of fresh reminders, Chris turned to look. Swaying, wearing jeans, sneakers, and a black t-shirt that read "The Phoenix Project" in bold red letters. Emily Brooks had grown taller, more confident. The shy little girl who once held a cardboard sign was now a poised 12-year-old volunteer helping other kids through the very foundation born from her father's story. Chris grinned as she neared. "Well, if it isn't the bravest kid in California." Emily smiled. "Hi, Mr. Pratt." "Hi, Mr. Reeves." Keanu opened his arms, and she ran straight into them, hugging him tightly. "You made it," he said warmly. "I promised Mom I'd come," she replied. "She's helping with a new support group this week, but she told me to tell you thank you for everything." Keanu smiled. "Your mom's the heart of what we built, Emily." "You both are." Chris crouched down beside her, his tone light. "So, what do you think of the set? Pretty cool, huh?" Emily's eyes widened as she looked around. Fire trucks gleamed under studio. Lights and extras milled about in mock firefighter gear. "It feels real," she said. "It's movie magic," Chris said, winking. "But I'll tell you a secret. Nothing here is half as real as what your dad did." Keanu nodded quietly. "That's why we wanted you here today. We're filming the dedication scene. It's for the closing of the movie." Her eyes lit up. "You mean the one about the firefighters?" "Exactly," Keanu said. "We wanted to make sure it feels true. The stories about people like your dad, the ones who show us what real bravery looks like." Emily looked down at the Phoenix Project logo on her shirt, brushing her fingers across it. "Then I'm glad I wore this." Keanu smiled. "Perfect choice." Chris looked at Keanu, grinning mischievously. "You know what I'm thinking?" Keanu groaned playfully. "Oh no." Chris clapped his hands. "Let's give our guest of honor the director's megaphone." Emily blinked, surprised. "Director's megaphone?" she asked, her voice half awe, half disbelief. Chris picked up the red megaphone from the folding chair beside the monitors and handed it to her with a grin. "That's right, Captain Brooks Jr., you're in charge for the day." The crew around them burst into laughter and applause. One of the camera operators shouted, "Yes, ma'am! We take orders from the boss now!" Emily giggled, gripping the megaphone carefully. It looked almost comically large in her small hands. But she stood tall, pretending to scan the set like a professional. "All right, everyone. she announced playfully. Places! The entire crew chuckled but followed along, moving into position. Keanu and Chris exchanged smiles, watching her command the moment with the same quiet confidence her father once had. When the laughter faded, Emily lowered the megaphone and turned to Keanu. You really mean it? I can tell everyone what to do? Keanu crouched down, so they were to. You already did, he said softly. A long time ago. She tilted her head, confused. That night at the gala, he continued, you reminded all of us what courage looks like. You changed everything without even knowing it. Her eyes filled slightly, though she smiled bravely. My dad would have loved this. Keanu nodded, his voice low but steady. He's here, kiddo. Always. Emily pressed the megaphone against her chest for a moment, like it was something sacred. Then I'll make him proud. Already have, Chris said with a smile. The assistant director walked over, whispering, We're ready to roll, Keanu. But Keanu didn't move right away. He placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. How about you call the first take? Emily's eyes went wide. Me? Why not? Chris said. You're the boss. The crew looked at her expectantly. She straightened up, holding the megaphone with both hands, her voice ringing out across. Doesn't fade. It becomes part of everything. Emily smiled, her voice small but certain. Then, I guess courage really never dies. Keanu nodded slowly. Exactly. The soundstage lights dimmed as they wrapped for the day, leaving behind echoes of laughter and gratitude. And as Emily walked off between Keanu and Chris, the Phoenix Project logo on her shirt caught the light bright, unbroken, and alive. Autumn returned to Los Angeles with cool winds and golden leaves scattered across the city sidewalks. The year had moved fast, filled with new beginnings, healing, and quiet acts of remembrance. The Phoenix Project had expanded beyond anyone's expectations, helping hundreds of families across the nation. But for Keanu, Chris, and Laura, one particular milestone carried a meaning deeper than any number or donation ever could. On a calm Saturday morning, the foundation gathered at a new memorial site built in Griffith Park. A serene space surrounded by trees, overlooking the city skyline. The memorial wall stood in the center, crafted from dark granite that reflected the sky like glass. Across the top, engraved in silver letters, were the words that had become the foundation's heartbeat. Courage never dies. Hundreds of people arrived quietly, some in uniform, others in simple clothes holding flowers. Families found seats facing the wall, each searching for a name among the engraved heroes who had once answered the call. Keanu and Chris stood near the back, dressed modestly, greeting guests without ceremony. They had insisted the day not be about them. No press conference, no red carpet, just a gathering of gratitude. Laura arrived with Emily beside her. The girl wore a white dress with a small phoenix pin on her collar. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a bouquet of lilies, the same flowers Keanu had once brought to her home. Keanu noticed her from across the crowd and walked forward, his expression soft. You look beautiful, Emily, he said. Thank you, she replied, smiling nervously. Mom said, today we finally see Dad's name on the wall. He nodded gently. It's a special day. He'd be proud of you both. Chris joined them, straightening his tie with an awkward grin. You ready, kiddo? Emily took a deep breath. I think so. When the ceremony began, a soft melody played from the small speaker system. A single trumpet, followed by the low hum of bagpipes. The MC, a retired firefighter, stepped to the podium and spoke in a voice that carried both strength and sorrow. Today, we honor those who gave everything for others, he said. Each name carved into this stone represents not just sacrifice, but love. They remind us that courage is not the absence of fear, it's the triumph over it. Keanu's eyes moved over the wall, scanning the hundreds of names until he found the one that mattered most, Captain Daniel Brooks. The letters gleamed faintly in the sunlight. For a moment, everything else faded away. The crowd, the speeches, even time itself. It was as if Daniel were there, standing silently among them. Emily noticed it too, her eyes locked onto her father's name, her small hands clutching the flowers tighter. "There he is," she whispered to her mother. Laura nodded, her lips trembling. "There he is." Keanu stepped back, giving them space. He wanted this to be their moment. As the ceremony continued, families were invited one by one to approach the memorial wall and place their flowers beneath the engraved names. The air was heavy but peaceful, filled with quiet sniffles, the rustle of paper programs, and the soft click of cameras from a respectful distance. When it was the Brooks family's turn, Laura stood and took Emily's hand. Keanu and Chris followed behind them, walking slowly through the rows of chairs. The morning sun had climbed higher now, casting soft reflections across the stone surface of the wall. Emily stopped in front of her father's name, her eyes tracing every letter. The engraving was deep and perfect, each curve of the letters carved into permanence. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Then she took a step closer, lifted the lilies, and set them down gently at the base of the wall. Her voice trembled at first, but she found her strength in the stillness. "Captain Daniel Brooks," she said softly. "My dad, I miss you, but I know you're not gone. You're here with all of us." Her words carried through the quiet park, wrapping around everyone who listened. A few people nearby began to cry. Chris bowed his head. Keanu stared at the name, his jaw tightening as emotion rose in his chest. Laura slipped her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "He's proud of you, sweetheart," she whispered. Emily nodded, blinking back tears. "I'm proud of him too." Keanu stepped forward then, holding a single white rose. He didn't say anything. He just knelt, placed the flower beside the crand, lilies, and pressed his hand gently against Daniel's name. For a second, he closed his eyes. His head bowed, his expression calm, but full of feeling. Chris joined him, setting down a small Phoenix Project pin beside the flowers. "For all the heroes who never stopped fighting," he murmured. When they both stood again, Emily looked up at Keanu. "Thank you for remembering him," she said softly. Keanu shook his head. "We didn't remember him," he said. "We followed him." That simple sentence hung in the air, like a promise. The MC stepped forward once more to close the ceremony. Let today remind us that courage doesn't vanish. When life ends, it continues in those who choose to live bravely. The crowd began to applaud gently, many holding each other's hands. The sound was tender, like a heartbeat echoing across the open field. As cameras clicked from the far edges of the gathering, Keanu quietly stepped back, blending into the crowd again. He preferred it that way. Let the families have the light. Let the names have the glory. Emily turned, spotting him near the back. She ran up to him and hugged him tightly. "I'm glad you came," she said. He returned the embrace with a soft smile. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." When she pulled away, she whispered, "He'd like you, you know." Keanu smiled faintly. "I think I like him too." The ceremony ended as the last names were read. The crowd lingered, unwilling to leave the sacred calm that had settled there. And as the sun began to sink behind the trees, its light reflected off the granite wall, each name glowing for a brief, golden moment. At the top, the words shimmered brighter than the rest. "Courage never dies." Keanu looked at them one last time before walking away, hands in his pockets, heart full of quiet peace. A full year passed after the unveiling of the memorial wall, and what began as a single moment of kindness had grown into something far greater than anyone imagined. The Phoenix Project had become a symbol of hope that stretched across America. Scholarships now existed in nearly every state, each one named after a fallen first responder. Fire departments and schools held assemblies every spring to honor them, and every ceremony carried the same phrase engraved into its banners: "Courage never dies." Emily Brooks, now 13, had changed in quiet, beautiful ways. The shy little girl who once clutched a cardboard sign at a gala had transformed into a young speaker, confident and compassionate, who shared her father's story with others. She had found her voice, and with it, her purpose. That morning, she stood backstage at a middle school auditorium in Chicago, holding the small stack of note cards for her speech. The air buzzed with anticipation. Rows of students filled the seats, whispering and fidgeting as they waited for the assembly to begin. At the front, a banner hung across the stage. "The Phoenix Project presents a tribute to everyday heroes." Laura stood beside her daughter, adjusting the microphone pinned to her collar. "You ready?" she asked. Emily nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "A little nervous." Laura smiled. "That's a good thing. It means you care about what you're saying." From the back of the auditorium, two quiet figures slipped in unnoticed: Keanu Reeves and Chris Pratt. They sat down in the last row, away from the cameras, wearing simple jackets and baseball caps. They didn't want attention. They just wanted to watch the young girl who had changed both of their lives. When the principal introduced Emily, the applause that followed was warm and sincere. She stepped onto the stage, standing on her tiptoes to reach the microphone. The lights above made her silver keychain sparkle faintly as she took a breath and began. "My name is Emily Brooks," she said. "A few years ago, my dad, Captain Daniel Brooks, ran into a burning building to save 2 children. He didn't come back out. For a long time, I thought that meant he was gone forever. But I've learned something since then, something that changed me." The room fell completely silent. She continued, her voice steady. "Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear leather jackets. Sometimes they ride motorcycles. Sometimes they just listen when someone else needs to talk." In the back row, Keanu lowered his head, emotion tightening in his throat. Chris glanced at him, his eyes shining with pride. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Emily looked out at the crowd of students, her words soft but full of conviction. "What makes someone a hero isn't what they wear. It's what they give: kindness, time, love. My dad showed me that, and so did a few friends who helped me remember it." The audience was completely prasus, still hanging on to every word. Emily glanced down at her note cards but then smiled and set them aside. "I was supposed to write this speech out," she said, "but I think it's better if I just talk." A small ripple of laughter moved through the room, breaking the tension. She looked around the crowd, students, teachers, firefighters, and parents, and continued. "When I was little, I used to wish I could have one more day with my dad. But now, I think I understand. Every day that I help someone, every time I make someone smile, that's another day I get to spend with him. He's part of everything good I do." Laura stood near the edge of the stage, her hand pressed over her heart, tears streaming down her cheeks. Emily turned slightly, looking toward the back of the room. She didn't see them at first, but she somehow knew Keanu and Chris were there. "I met 2 people who taught me something my dad would have said if he were here," she said softly. "That courage isn't loud. It doesn't always shout or fight. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just sitting with someone who's hurting and reminding them they're not alone." The audience erupted into gentle applause, and Emily waited for it to fade before finishing. That's what the Phoenix Project is all about. It's about remembering that even when people are gone, what they stood for never disappears. Courage keeps living. It never dies. She paused, then smiled shyly. "Thank you." The applause that followed was thunderous. Teachers stood. Firefighters wiped their eyes. Students cheered her name. But Emily didn't look overwhelmed. She looked at peace. She gave a small bow, then stepped off the stage and ran straight into her mother's arms. From the back, Keanu stood slowly, clapping quietly, his eyes wet. Chris joined him. His trademark grin softened into something almost reverent. "She's incredible," Chris whispered. Keanu nodded, his voice low. "She's what happens when love doesn't stop." They both stood there for a moment longer, watching as Emily posed for pictures with firefighters and students, laughing shyly as people thanked her. Every once in a while, she'd look down at the silver keychain still clipped to her belt loop. The words on it, "Courage Never Dies," caught the light and gleamed faintly. After the crowd began to thin, Emily noticed the two men lingering near the doors. Her face lit up, and she ran toward them, hugging them both without hesitation. "You came," she said, her voice filled with joy. Chris laughed. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." Keanu smiled warmly. "You did amazing, kiddo. Your dad would have been proud." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "You really think so?" He knelt slightly, so they were at eye level. "I don't think," he said softly. "I know." For a moment, the three of them stood there, no cameras, no spotlight, just the quiet echo of applause, still lingering in the air. Chris glanced around the emptying auditorium and smiled. "You realize," he said, "she just taught everyone in this room more about courage than any movie ever could." Keanu nodded, his gaze fixed on Emily. And she didn't even have to act. The three of them walked out into the fading afternoon light together. Behind them, the banner on stage swayed gently from the ceiling, the last words catching the sunlight before the lights dimmed for good. "Heroes live on in those who remember." And as the doors closed, Keanu felt a calm he hadn't known in years, a quiet truth settling deep within him. The world had moved on, but something sacred remained. The house was quiet that evening, wrapped in the soft glow of a single lamp. Keanu sat at his desk, the pages of his journal open before him. Outside, the city moved on, as it always did. But inside that room, time seemed to slow. The framed photo beside him caught the light a picture of Emily, Laura, and Daniel's badge resting between them. It had become a symbol of everything the Phoenix Project stood for: love that endures, courage that outlives tragedy, and hope that finds its way home. He picked up his pen and began to write, his handwriting steady, deliberate. "I've played heroes in movies," he wrote, "but the real ones never get scripts. They just act when it matters. They don't wait for the cameras or the applause. They just do what needs to be done, and in doing so, they change the world." He paused for a moment, staring at the photo again. Emily's smile looked brighter than ever, her eyes full of the kind of strength that couldn't be taught, only lived. Her mother's expression was calm, peaceful. Between them, Daniel's badge gleamed faintly in the reflection of the lamp. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his mind wandering through the memories of the past 2 years. He thought of that night at the charity gala, the little girl with the handmade sign, the courage it took for her to stand there, the spark that had turned grief into purpose. He thought of Laura's healing, Chris's laughter, the memorial wall, the documentary, and the countless letters from families who had found peace again. He whispered softly into the stillness, "Courage never dies." It wasn't just a phrase anymore. It was truth. He turned the page in his journal and kept writing. "What I've learned is that courage has many faces. Sometimes it looks like a firefighter rushing into flames. Sometimes it's a widow picking up the pieces of her life. And sometimes it's a little girl who refuses to let her father's memory fade. Courage is quiet, it's patient, and it always finds a way to keep living." The clock on the wall ticked softly. Keanu set his pen down and folded his hands, taking a long breath. From another room, faint music played from an old record player, a song Daniel used to love, one that Laura had given Keanu as a thank you months earlier. He let the melody fill the air, warm and haunting. He looked again at the photo. "You all taught me something," he said under his breath. "You reminded me that being a hero isn't about saving the world. It's about saving one heart at a time." Outside, a breeze stirred through the open window, rustling the edge of the journal page. The words he had just written fluttered softly, as though the world itself was echoing back his thoughts. Keanu leaned back in his chair, staring out the window as the wind whispered through the trees. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but his focus stayed on the photo beside his journal. In that small frame lived everything that mattered: the past, the present, and the quiet proof that compassion could outlast pain. He thought about Daniel Brooks not as a name on a wall, but as a man who had changed lives by doing what he loved. He thought about Laura, who turned grief into service, and Emily, who transformed loss into inspiration. Each of them had shown him that strength wasn't about pretending not to hurt. It was about finding a way to keep loving despite the pain. He opened his journal again and began to write his final entry for the day. "Kindness," he wrote, "has a way of rebuilding broken hearts. You never know what one small act might do for someone else. You never know whose world you might change by simply showing up." He paused, reflecting on how many people had shown up since that first night at the gala. Chris, who lent his voice and humor to something bigger than both of them. Laura, who refused to let her husband's story fade. Emily, who turned her father's courage into a movement that reached thousands. He smiled faintly and wrote, "Compassion is the bridge between loss and renewal. It's what turns endings into beginnings." Closing the journal, he placed his pen neatly across it. He stood and walked to the small shelf near the window where he kept mementos: a Firefighter's badge replica, the Phoenix Project pin, a copy of the scholarship certificate signed by Emily herself. On the shelf's top sat the framed drawing she'd given him years earlier, now slightly faded but still vibrant. 3 figures standing side by side with capes fluttering in crayon skies. Above them, the words "heroes" come in many forms. Keanu traced a finger across the glass and whispered, "You were right, kiddo." The room grew quiet again, filled only with the hum of the record player spinning its final notes. He sat down once more, staring at the photo of Emily, Laura, and Daniel's badge. The light from the lamp reflected off the glass, giving it a faint glow. He spoke softly, as though Daniel himself could hear. "You saved people from fire, but you also saved me from forgetting what real heroism looks like." A small smile crossed his face, one that carried both sorrow and peace. He whispered one last line, more to himself than anyone else. "Courage never dies. It just finds new hearts to live in." He reached over and closed his journal gently, the words within now complete. The pages held not just his reflections, but a map of every life that had intersected his since that night. A mosaic of bravery, grief, and love that had shaped him in ways no movie role ever could. As he turned off the lamp, the last light in the room lingered on the framed photo. The silver badge shimmered faintly, the engraved letters catching the glow for just a moment before fading into shadow. And in that darkness, there was peace. Because the story wasn't ending, it was continuing, quietly, in every act of kindness that would follow. Comment prompt 1. Have you ever met someone whose courage inspired you? Comment prompt 2. What kind of story would you like to see Keanu in next?